Says, I have a question about cadence during rest between intervals. As it hits peaks of more than 300 watts, I keep my cadence around 90. So that's like the work intervals. He's talking about the hard ones. But when the valleys drop to 90 watts or so and I'm gasping for breath, my cadence often drops to around 60 or 70 RPM. This is partly because my smart trainer seems to be recording too much power, he says, with high cadence, but even more, it's because I'm gassed. I think what he's talking about there is the fact that you run into a floor with some smart trainers in the sense that 90 watts, that power target, if he just pedals in whatever gear he was in, it may not allow you to drop all the way to 90.
And to fix that is don't be in a big gear, shift into a little gear or be in a bigger cog in the back, and that'll allow you to not hit that cadence floor issue.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. It says, should I drop my FTP so I can pedal faster during rest? Are there any disadvantages to spinning slowly during rest? Thanks, from John. This is another great question.
Yep. Yeah. So, John, the big take home here is that it's not so much about how slowly or quickly you pedal, so much as you do it easily. I don't think there's going to be any detrimental outcomes because you recover at 30 RPM versus recover at 60 versus recover at 90. Honestly, you're just trying to shed fatigue and get recovered enough so that you can do it again. With that said, let's steer the conversation more towards the intensity of the recovery and maybe even the duration of the recovery, because what you may not realize is that the intricacy and the subtleties of recovery intervals is it's vast. There's quite a lot of consideration that goes into how long they are, how low they are, where they fall, frequency, etc. So the compendium resource on this matter is recently surfaced, and it's caused me to review a lot of the workout designs that I have in place. It's a book titled Science and Application of High Intensity Interval Training. I've talked about it a number of times already. It's Paul Lorson and Martin Buchheit. And what's kind of cool about it is that I go through it and all the studies that they're using on this particular topic, the recovery interval characteristics, are the same studies that I used literally 10 years ago. So it's not like there's been a whole bunch of emerging science on recovery duration intervals or recovery interval durations and intensity. So good news is I don't have to go change any workouts. That isn't to say I wouldn't do it. If we found a better way, we would absolutely put it into effect.
It's one of the things that we adhere to is constant improvement, always making the changes whenever we need to.
Yeah, new information crops up, and we will absolutely make use of it if it makes sense and if it makes you all faster.
And I just want to say too, there's fads that come through all the time.
Yes.
We are completely aware of them. And we
that's true. People do. It seems like they assume we are not aware.
Exactly. Oh, did you hear about XYZ? Yes. All chat does, but we all hear about it and everyone tells about us. And then we look in the research and we are totally open.
Yeah.
We discuss
We appreciate you sharing, and we're not afraid to have a conversation on the matter, but trust me when I tell you we know.
Yeah.
And keep sharing though. Because
keep it going.
Sure.
Yeah, we like it.
That's what we do all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
And we can't stay on top of all the emerging science. I mean, there are literally thousands of papers a day. It's impossible for us to stay. Although, we are in a pretty narrow niche of all those research papers, so it's a little more
but
possible.
I'm just because people are,
Totally.
Yep.
Oh yeah, I got it.
We try real hard. We do.
So yeah.
Okay, so let's talk first off the objectives of recovery. Or really, let's talk about the objectives of recovery.
For sure.
They're twofold, really. So you're trying to accumulate high overall workload with the workout, and that's going to influence the recovery characteristics, or you're trying to maintain a high level of output in all of your subsequent intervals. So you're trying to start high, stay high, sort of thing. When it comes to accumulating a high overall workload, usually due to low time availability, which we can all relate to, and you basically want to get as much work done in a short period of time as possible. Because of that, this is where you will see either a heightened recovery intensity or more likely a shortened recovery duration. You're just going to cram it all in there and hope for the best. Occasionally, you'll see a combination of the two. And that combination of the two typically weaves its way into the training plan design more towards specialization, when you have to be able to make the most out of a little bit of recovery, and you still have to do quite a bit of work during these recovery valleys. So it'll change over the course of a training plan or a BBS cycle.
Those are the worst.
Specialist. Oh, they are. They are, but they
They're the best.
prepare you quite well.
Exactly.
The worst and the best.
So like I said, the other end is to maintain a high level of output, interval to interval to interval, to not fall apart over the course of a workout. So you want a big training stimulus. And that kind of comes in two parts, or there are two ways to address that. One is to maximize the work capacity during each work interval. So basically, we're just looking for high watts. And when that happens, that's when we're probably going to lead, or I'm going to lead, will lead me to design workouts with prolonged and passive recoveries. And in passive, I consider 40% FTP pretty passive. I mean, a lot of the studies, when they talk about passive rest, they're talking about runners who walk. They're still doing something. They're not just standing there. Sometimes it's unloaded pedaling. So they're back pedaling or there's no resistance on the wheel, but they're still moving. Occasionally they'll have them stand there, but I don't see that very often where they just cease all motion. They're still doing some type of activity. So even though it's called passive, it's not 100% passive. And then when it comes, so you'll see these prolonged and passive recoveries more when it comes to the really high intensity stuff. And a lot of the times the really high intensity stuff like the anaerobic repeats and sprint intensity training. And these can get really long, 3-to-1. You'll rest 3 times as long as you work, all the way up to like 10-to-1. You can get crazy long depending on the intensity and the sought after outcomes. One study to support this is Yamagishi and Bob Raj, 2019, Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research. They did active rest during the intervals. So they had the athletes continue to pedal and they derived more of an aerobic stimulus. And this actually led them to more of an aerobic adaptation. So even though they were training the anaerobic component or the sprint component, they got really good aerobic return on it. So in particular, they were doing, basically, if you take a look at workouts like Detling, Burling, Charing, all the ones that are sprint intensity workouts, this is almost exactly what they describe, where they had athletes work 30 seconds at a time, all out, and then they had 4-minute recoveries.
And that's full recovery.
Yeah, so pretty full. I mean, it could be argued that you're not going to regenerate all of your anaerobic work capacity more along the lines of 10 minutes. So it could take quite a bit longer to get full regeneration of it. But I think at like 4 or 5 minutes, you're seeing 95% regeneration. So absolutely enough to work with. Not to mention, it kind of walks that line between anaerobic return and aerobic return. So you get an increased aerobic input with each subsequent sprint, which is why the sprint intensity training workouts are really heavily influenced toward aerobic benefit.
Yeah.
And in this case, because they did the active recoveries versus the passive recoveries, which was the other study group, they actually saw an increase in what they call critical power, but what we call FTP. So they actually got an uptick in FTP by working through these 4-minute breaks instead of just sitting there or pedaling unloaded. And I think they worked at, it was, I can't remember now, but it was a very low effort level, something akin to 40% FTP, which is what I use. And they attribute that to greater cardiorespiratory demands during the active recovery. With the active recovery, individuals gain greater training benefits without increasing total training commitment time. So they didn't have to be on the bike any longer. They just happened to pedal through the brakes, and they derived a greater training stimulus as a result of it. Got faster.
I feel like, oh, sorry, Nate, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
You came in hot to the mic. It's all you.
I'm going to say just a sec. I feel if you train more, you get faster. Like the more you pedal, the more beneficial it is.
Pretty much, to a point.
Like,
as long
rather
as
than
you're
not
doing too much work. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Still
that's
has
amazing.
Still has to constitute.
That's what all you just said is like.
Still has to constitute recovery.
Instead of
but yes.
if you're in your workout, instead of not pedaling, pedal lightly.
Yeah, exactly. Don't just sit there. I mean, which nobody does anyway. I wouldn't.
Some people do.
Sure. Occasionally you get so shattered that you have to just kind of sit there and reel.
That's different. But just pedal lightly.
Yeah. Hey, I find, to one point that I find really interesting, I've found that when I'm really getting closer to peak fitness and everything else, that's when my recovery intervals really matter. Not necessarily because I'm getting so fatigued I need them as much, but the distance or the duration of those recovery valleys and then the intensity of those recovery valleys, if I stick to those with adherence, when I follow our plans, then I'm prepped on race day.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of the time it's really easy for us to focus on the work and just let the recovery be the recovery.
No, the whole experience gets overtly more race-like. I mean, that is the goal, to make sure that when you get out on the race course, there are no surprises.
And I try really hard to nail my recovery intervals at the same precision and focus that I do with my work intervals, especially when I'm getting closer to race day, because I've never been in a race yet where I can ask somebody, can you please wait for 10 minutes so my anaerobic stores can regenerate? That doesn't happen, right? So like those rest intervals, if they're constrained, you really need to hold yourself to those constraints when you're getting close to race day.
Yeah, then it's more about performance than conditioning, although there's still a benefit on both sides.
Try it all year long.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You'll just be better, right? Yeah. Let's go into some. Oh, yeah.
So those were with the anaerobic and the sprint intensity. Then when we get down to VO2 max repeats, we'll still see reasonably long recoveries, shorter than the 3 to 1, 10 to 1 ratio, but still usually a couple minutes. And interestingly, the same study that they cite in this book was the one that I read probably literally back in 2005, was Seiler and Hedelid took moderately trained runners. Yeah, they are runners, but it's still an endurance sport, still repetitive action. Had them do 6x4 at 85% of velocity at VO2 max, which basically puts us right around threshold. So they were doing threshold repeats, but they were doing it on a 5% incline, which makes it definitely above threshold repeats because they were trying to maintain a velocity. So a velocity with an increase in incline is going to probably constitute something more along the lines of a VO2 max effort. Mm-hmm. And they allowed the runners to self-select their recovery window. They wanted them to do these 6x4s, but between each 4-minute interval, they said recover for as long as you need to before you feel like you can do it again just as well. And what they settled on was about 2 minutes of recovery per. So about a 1 to 2 work to or rest to work ratio, 2 to 1 work to rest. 2 to 1, yeah. And what was further even more interesting was that when they reduced the recovery intervals to 1 minute, they saw a decline in their velocity over the course of each subsequent 4-minute interval. When they lengthened it to 4 minutes, they saw no real change. So 2 minutes was sufficient, which is why if you look at our VO2 max workouts, for the most part, you'll see 2-minute rests. Mm-hmm. But we at TrainerRoad have the luxury of sitting upon a lot of data, seeing a lot of incoming ride files every day, and we notice certain things. And one of those things was that when we used 2-minute recoveries on these VO2 max repeats, we didn't get the sort of workout adherence that we wanted. Therefore, we thought these workouts could actually be more productive. How can we change them? So what did we do? But lengthen those durations to 3 and sometimes 4 minutes. And what did we see? Greater workout compliance.
Yeah.
More people getting faster.
So we adjusted our plans earlier in some of the workouts because of this, because you have that study. Mm-hmm. But we have...
It says what works in the case of, and these are moderately trained runners. So some of our people probably are moderately trained and maybe those 2-minute windows work perfectly for them. But what about all the people who are recreationally trained or elite trained, but really gas it on the intervals?
The cool thing is that we had workouts with the same intensity, the same duration of, like the same percentage of FTP and the same work period, but ones with 90 seconds, 2 minutes, 2:30, 2:15, and then hundreds of thousands of examples in each one of those.
It's data these studies would dream of having.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
And then we saw a huge drop off. I mean, like a huge increase with just like 30 more seconds. Yeah. The compliance rate went almost like from like very low to very high.
Yeah.
Like switch the numbers
Yes.
for failure versus compliance.
And in the case of those types of workouts, this is the other end of things where we're trying to. So when we maximize work capacity during the intervals, we go about it 2 ways. We either try to jam the watts up as high as we can get them, or we try to keep oxygen consumption as high as we can for the longest amount of time. Mm-hmm. And that's more what we're veering toward with these longer ones. So we give them a longer recovery, but the intervals are long enough that we still achieve a lot of time up at that high aerobic or oxygen uptake. Totally. So we're not missing the point by adding 30 seconds or another minute's worth of recovery. We're maintaining high quality in the interval so that we get a stronger training stimulus. Yeah. And then, as always, as you progress through the base build cycle or specialty cycle, by the time you reach that specialty plan, that's when it doesn't matter what works for you or not. This is how your race is going to be like, and this is what you need to be able to do. So this is what the workouts are. Get them done.
Yeah. So I'm going to talk about some trade secrets.
Oh.
So that's what rearranging the workouts inside of a plan. Mm-hmm. That's what we did, is because, like how Chad said, maybe that workout in week 3 has a very high compliance rate, whereas week 1 it didn't.
Yeah.
So by making those small tweaks, we get a higher compliance, and at the end you're actually do more work, and you're more likely to do more power or do more repeats later in the plan than if you did.
Yeah.
Like you made the workouts different earlier on.
You're faster.
Yeah.
Exactly.
These are all things we have access to teasing out. It's pretty fantastic.
It's pretty neat.
It's neat.
Okay, so
it's neat.
What else do I have
it's
here?
Pretty neat.
I'm just about done on this. Okay, so there was another. Oh yeah, so the other end of this. So like I said, we try to keep the watts high, or we try to keep the oxygen uptake high. In order to keep the oxygen uptake high, which is a very strong training stimulus, we basically try to maintain a high level of oxygen uptake during the recoveries. This is why the recoveries are short, and this is sometimes why they're tall.
Yes. Unfortunately, so some might say.
Yep. So it's very active recovery. So
that's a good way of putting it.
Over unders. That's the very active recovery.
That's the nature of active recovery. That does not qualify. No. So DuPont 2004 used 15-15s, and they just call it high intensity intermittent exercise. So I honestly don't know. I think it was. I don't know. I did look into it. I'm sorry, I can't recall right now. But the point of it was they used passive recovery in between the 15-15s. So 15 seconds of going full on, 15 seconds of doing nothing, versus active recovery, where I think they had them work at 40% of VO2 max. So we're talking about 50%-ish of FTP. The people who practice the passive recovery versus, the passive recovery time to exhaustion went up a ton, whereas active did not. I think I may have switched that around.
We'll add it in on the forum. We'll add in the proper order to those ones.
Yeah. Let's table that one for now because I
messed up my notes with a confused look.
That can't be right.
Cool.
Anyway, so to wrap all this up, at the time of development, I'm very clear on what I'm trying to achieve with the workouts. Even if, as I get past, creating a plan or creating workouts, I lose sight of what I was originally intended on. So the due diligence has been done, I promise you. And if we learn better things as we evolve, we're happy to change them. We're happy to learn from our own research.
100%.
We're not tying our boat to a specific training methodology.
No.
We don't care.
Science.
Yeah, exactly.
We're tied to science.
Exactly. It makes you faster and keeps you healthy. We're all about it.
Yep. If you like that video, you should subscribe to our channel. There's more where that came from. And even like the video down below with a thumbs up or leave us a comment.
If you want to see race analysis videos, click right over here. And if you want to get your coaching questions answered, click over here.
And if you want to become a faster cyclist, head over to TrainerRoad.com. It works. Trust us.
Just trust us.
We guarantee it.
Oh, yeah. Or your money back.
It's true. Take us up on it.